Hello, I'm Dr Jodi Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. Deep down, today's guest, Casey Ehrlich, had always known something about her son was not typical. She was at a complete loss, as any of us would be, when her son started having violent meltdowns that would escalate no matter what she did to help. As time went on, he stopped eating, walking, and speaking, and when he wasn't hidden inside of himself, he would explode. Casey left her career and moved with her family to a small town in Michigan in the United States. After a year as a full-time caregiver, mother, and researcher of her child, she finally understood what was at the heart of what was happening. Casey changed how she understands, parents, and accommodates her son. She found a deep connection with him and a sense of competence and peace in her identity as a parent. Casey is the founder of At Peace Parenting and is dedicated to supporting other parents with children just like hers to feel confident and at peace, to see their children as whole humans who will thrive with the right support. She offers trauma-informed approaches and creative accommodations for anxiety and meltdowns. She supports other parents to lead their family out of the darkness with a knowing that they don't have to do it alone. Casey, you have a really painful experience to share, but it's led you to do such fulfilling and meaningful work. And I welcome you wholeheartedly to talk with us about that today. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you. And I'd love for you to start by telling us, what was it that you discovered that changed everything?
Yeah, I think the thing that changed everything there was understanding his behavior not as behavior, but as connected to a deeper root cause that actually wasn't under his control. Um, and I think that connects to a lot of different things, not just pathological demand avoidance, but neurodivergence in general, and trauma. And so at the time, I didn't know exactly what the root cause was and started approaching my son through like a sensory processing disorder lens. But before that, the biggest shift was just starting to see it not as like this is attention seeking, manipulative, or something that I need to control with behavioral strategies, but rather like how can we peel back a layer and support what's driving these behaviors in a way that's actually not, conscious. So that was sort of my first step into the world of neurodiversity and trauma informed parenting. Um, and yeah, that was the biggest initial shift. And then probably the second biggest was learning that pathological demand avoidance even existed, which happened through, I think there was the PDA North America conference, and in March, 4 years ago, I think from right now. And I had met another mom on the Tilt parenting group, and I was asking about a service dog because at that time I was also viewing him as like extremely anxious, and we connected locally, and she was going to that conference. And so we started diving into pathological demand avoidance together. And that led me to like sort of three pathways for collecting information outside of my son's, my interactions with my son, the trauma literature, the writings on pathological demand avoidance, and then autistic and PDA adult advocates. And sort of my approach has been to bring all of that plus my lived experience together. And that's where I am now as a mom and a business owner.
Yes. Can you tell us more about that experience, and over what period of time were you in the dark about what he was experiencing and what was underpinning all of the behaviors that you would see?
I mean, I was in the dark for years because it started actually when he was born. I had a pretty traumatic birth. I had severe postpartum depression, anxiety, and OCD. Um, and part of that was reinforced by the fact that he didn't sleep and he almost never stopped crying. And I remember telling people, like, my newborn doesn't sleep, or, he really doesn't stop crying. And it was like, oh, yeah, all new moms are tired. Yeah, it's really tiring. But some of my friends from graduate school, when he was 8 weeks old, um, banded together and bought me a night nurse for 2 nights because I was like not in a good place with my mental health. And the night nurse came over and she recorded like how much he slept as part of her job, 12 hours overnight. And she was like, a lot of parents say that their kids are colicky, but like your child, like this infant is different. Like he's only sleeping in 5 minute stints or like for 20 minutes and then he'll be up for 2 hours. And he would just scream incessantly, but like in pain, you know? Um, and so for the first portion of his life, I really just saw myself as a failure as a mother. But,
Yeah.
there was a part of me that also knew I was doing everything I possibly could. Like, I hadn't planned on it, but I was co-sleeping, constantly wrapping, breastfeeding on command, all the things, not out of a philosophy, but out of survival mode.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so there wasn't much more of myself or my body that I could give. But my husband and I had to take shifts where, one of us had to be up and moving in order for him to stop crying all night. So we would take shifts because it wasn't like you could just like rock him. You had to be like vigorously bouncing. And that ties into his um, sensory seeking and proprioceptive, like needing to feel where his body is in space.
Yes.
But I didn't know any of these words or any of these things, right? Um, and then, things settled a bit. When we got childcare and I went back to writing my dissertation. And so it wasn't as dark a place. But then when I got pregnant with my second son, things started to escalate with his behavior. And there were always things that I didn't really understand because, I would read the parenting books of like, they're going to want independence at the age of 2.5 and they should be playing in this way. And he never played independently. He would respond, but I would like build things and he would crash them down, or he would want me to like make motions and he would passively engage in the sense of like, it wasn't a reciprocal play. It was like me entertaining him.
Yes.
And if I looked away for a little bit, he like would immediately get dysregulated. Like he couldn't play on his own at all. Um, and when my second son was born, I started to really notice those differences more because my second son did engage on his own a little bit, and wasn't constantly in distress. Um, but yeah, my son started having much more defiant behavior, or what seemed like defiant behavior. Now I understand it as fight flight behavior, but just anything. Like I would ask him to sit down at the table, to not stand on the table, to pick up his toys with me, to put his clothes on, take his clothes off. It's just every transition, buckle the seatbelt. It was like he would physically fight me, but with lots of adrenaline and cortisol going through his little body, and there were things that I had to do, like buckle his seatbelt, right?
Yes.
um, yeah, or eventually move his body up to bed. This is when he was 4. And he was increasingly getting, he always masked, or at the time I didn't understand that term. He was just 2 different versions of himself. And so at daycare and with his grandmother, they were like, yeah, he's great. He's fine. He plays and does his stuff by himself. He'd go to his grandma's once a week, spend the night, and he would eat pretty typically, go to sleep early, not run around the house and destroy things. And then the second we would pick him up, it was like a mask came off and he would be completely different. Again, blamed myself. You can see a
Of
theme
course.
and
Yes.
why I'm so
Yes.
passionate about helping other parents, especially moms, because there was just such a deep sense of failure and isolation. So I once my second son was born, well, when this was happening, I was increasingly trying to use strategies from traditional parenting, what the pediatrician said. And the more I used any type of consequence or routine or structure or even rewards, he just continually escalated. And he started having like meltdowns that would last over an hour. And like I couldn't even get near him, or he'd attack me or my husband. When my infant son was born, I had to like pick him up and run out of the house so he wouldn't be in the line of fire. It was just very terrifying. And my husband and I are both um peacemakers and on the quieter side. I mean, I spent most of a decade inside of libraries, so I'm like not someone who likes conflict. So we were like, where is this coming from? um But when things started to show up in his basic needs, like where he stopped eating, he would say, "My legs don't work." We would have to carry him. Um, and he, stopped making eye contact, stopped speaking, and was mostly making sounds. It was like obvious that it was beyond behaviors, to quote Mona Hook's book, Beyond Behaviors.
Yes.
Um, yeah. And there was one weekend where things just escalated, and I was like in the street in my suburb of Maryland, because we lived in DC, Washington DC, with my infant son, just like standing away from my house bawling. And like the neighbors are like, "What, are you guys okay? Like, what is happening?" And while I was there in the street, my son locked my husband in the basement. um and it was just like, I was like, something is wrong here, like this is not typical, and what the pediatricians are telling me is not helping um at all. They would fluctuate between telling us like, take parenting classes or take him to get ice cream, or like when things really started to escalate, like, why don't you take him to children's um psychiatric emergency room? And my mother-in-law was like, don't take him there, like bring him to my house. And he just like went into shutdown for a couple days at her house. But I couldn't handle him anymore, like, to be honest. I was like, I'm gonna do something that I'll regret, because like he's so violent. My nervous system, I was having trouble, you know, staying nonviolent myself. And I was like, I need him out of the house. Like, he's trying to hurt my baby. And it was just a really dark moment. But in that moment, when he was at my mother in law's and that happened, I was just like, I have to leave my career. I have to at least take a break. I have to leave this job and figure it out, because nobody else is going to figure it out if I don't.
Mm.
So here we are.
Goodness, here we are, and I just want to thank you for sharing so openly, because I know that retelling the story can't be easy, and it must have been just so difficult, especially knowing that he seemed to be much more typical when he was with other people. And
Yeah.
as mums, we are just so we just pour our heart and soul and every fiber of our being into our children. And for you to be finding yourself in that situation, I cannot even begin to imagine what that was like for you and for your husband and for your relationship, and just really to function outside of the home, even when you were at work. So it's hard, isn't it? But I've heard one of my guests say, research is me search. And
Yeah.
I've always said we make our work from our wounds. And it's where we are now, you're in a much different position. Obviously, there's a huge amount of learning and trial and error and understanding and research that's come before. But to be where you are now, I applaud you because it wasn't going to come from anyone else. It wasn't. The pediatricians just mustn't have understood.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I think, unfortunately, I think this is the story of many parents who don't necessarily have the same privilege I have, right? Of like being able to take off from my career and put my energy and time into this business, which, the first year and a half made zero money.
Yes.
Like but it is what fuels me, right? But I don't think it's such a unique story, unfortunately. I just don't think every person has the privilege to be able to like leave their career and dedicate the time. And that's part of like what I want to shorten for other people so they don't have to go through all the trial and error and pain. And I do think even just in the last 4 years, awareness about PDA is radically different than it was 4 years ago.
Yes, and the fact that there was even the conference
Yeah, it was
was
the first one.
was it? Right, it was the
Yeah.
first one and you were there, so
Oh, I wasn't there, but my
oh,
friend was going, and
oh,
I
your
was like,
friend was
"Tell me
going.
everything."
Yes, yes. What just a light bulb moment and what relief to just have some understanding. We just want to understand because we'll do all we can within our time and resources and support networks. We'll do all we can, but when you're at a loss as to what to do, it's a very, very painful place. And I
Yes.
wonder if you can tell us how common is PDA in the wider community?
It's a great question. It's one that, like, as a researcher, I really wanna know the answer to. I think people vastly underestimate it, the
Mm,
incidence in the population, and a testament to that is just even in the past 2 years, just in my child's age group, I've met, like, 11 other families in the county that I live in, right? And that's just people who have come to learn about PDA and connect with one another through a therapist in the area that can recognize it. So, and then through my business, like I sort of have a bird's eye view, and that started with the first project and podcast that I did with another mom, which is called PDA Parents. I don't know if you saw that. Um, but we just started getting messages pouring in from all over the world. And so before that project, I was like, oh, it's rare, right? But it's just more and more when we give people the right lens and the right language and the right um, root cause understanding, I think more and more people are making sense of children who have been diagnosed with lots of other things that have never fully been explanatory for them. Um, and it just comes as such a relief because it's like once you put the lens on, you can see everything clearly, and that's what I hope to do just on my social media of just like help people understand like this is what it is, because without that we can have no idea how many of these kids are out there, or people, right? A lot of parents I
yes.
work with are realizing their own neurodivergence or PDA neurotype as we do the work together.
Which would be putting puzzle pieces together for them in a way that probably brings great understanding and probably explains a lot of what they've experienced in their life that just they never quite understood. It's just, gosh, to know and understand ourselves is such a gift. And I love the name of your business, At Peace Parenting, because it's what we all hope for in our homes, peaceful kids. And how did you move from where you were to where you are now? How did you begin the process of change? What did you do differently once you understood more?
Well, I think the first part of the process, I think, for most parents is understanding. Like, if you can understand the deep why, even if you haven't made the shifts yet, you at least release yourself from self-loathing and self-blame, and you start to release your child from that as well. And so that's like the first step of really understanding, oh, this is why this is happening. It's not anyone's fault. Um, so that, it took me a year to get there. And I wrote a secret blog about sensory processing disorder and would just write all of these blog posts of like through the lens of sensory, trying to explain and sort of process my son's behavior. And I wouldn't publish it more publicly because it didn't make sense to me. I was a social scientist, so I like deal in causality and measurement and all that stuff. And I'm like, this doesn't make sense what I'm writing. So, understanding the deep why. But even before that, I had shifted from behavioral approaches to supportive approaches of like, you know, if the child struggles with tags, we get them compression shirts without tags, or if they need fidgets, we get them fidgets. So of course I had started down that route. And lowering demands was part of that. But then, like, I read all the stuff that was written on PDA from clinicians, and I have to shout out to all the autistic advocates in PDA, autistic adults who are on social media or have done their own work or courses, because that was like the refinement of like, okay, they're demand avoidant, but why is it sometimes and not others? So Christy Forbes, a lot of her work, Sally Cat, she wrote a book, PDA by PDAers, which was really helpful to go through. In Play We Trust on TikTok. I really like her stuff, Neurodivergent Rebel. And then just, I think I was following like 1,000 different neurodivergent advocates and just sort of like piecing it all together for my son and trying to see him through that lens and, experimenting. I think a lot of the accommodations that I've come to teach parents are through experimentation, like the Declarative Language Handbook by Linda K. Murphy was going around like wildfire in my mom's support group here in Michigan, and we all bought it and implemented, and it was super effective for our children. So, most of it was getting that information, refining it, bringing in the trauma literature and experimenting, and then seeing, like, instead of screaming at me, he's actually listening and we're communicating. So not to say that it solved everything. And then parallel to this, like when my son hit his deep crisis, nervous system burnout, I was not a spiritual person, but started doing a lot of reading from all different spiritual traditions. Like my reading list was like one of those jokes of like a rabbi and a Catholic priest and a Buddhist monk walk into a bar, because I was literally just like, okay, I have John O'Donohue and I have like, Buddhist texts, and then I have like Harry Kushner. What's his last name? Harry Kushner's When Bad Things Happen to Good People. Like I was just like searching, for
Yes.
meaning, and that, I'm sorry if I'm rambling too much, but
No,
this
no.
is like how my brain works. It takes a lot of different pieces of information and connects them.
True
Um,
scientist.
yeah.
True
And
scientist.
then, I started really seeing my son and his dysregulation and big meltdowns as an opportunity to practice nonviolence, which is what my doctoral work and my previous life work was about.
Yes.
And I was like, how ironic is it for me to write a book manuscript on, communities in Colombia and nonviolent practices and peace, but like here I am in the home, not able to like do it minute to minute. I want to yell back. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Oh my gosh. It is. And I thank you for being open and honest about how you were feeling. And I really applaud that because a lot of mums have neurotypical children or not, maybe when they're infants, we don't really know, but can get to the point where they do yell or have, and it's common. We do know that it is common for mums, especially mums experiencing postpartum depression, to have thoughts of harming their children. And
Mhm.
I had those thoughts. I went through what you went through after the birth of our firstborn, and it's terrifying.
Yeah.
And you feel like a terrible mum and you don't understand and it's painful. And I think if we can be more open about those experiences, then other women who are going through it will go, oh yeah, other women go through this too. I'm not terrible. And we know that the research also says that just because you think it doesn't mean you're going to do it. You're no more likely to hurt your child than any other parent. So I really, really thank you for being open and honest and sharing. And I think any other parent in your position would feel the same. And it's it's so interesting to hear you talk about the journey and what I can tell from the way you approached it was with this scientific curiosity. Not that you would have been consciously thinking about that, but it's like, right, well, I'm going to try something different. Let's see what happens, that experimentation. And all of a sudden, I think whenever we come from that point of view of curiosity, it can just shift something in ourselves too, can't it? It reduces the expectation, it settles our nervous system. We're not so hell bent on things going a particular way. And so it brings me to ask, I guess, a couple of questions that I think are pertinent. One is, I'll ask them one at a time too. What is the relationship between autism and PDA? Do they always go hand in hand or not necessarily?
This is a great question, and I'll be honest, like, I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
Um, my perspective and hypothesis is that PDA goes hand in hand with autism. Like, certainly my son is autistic, and, I think the perspective in the autistic community who identify as PDA is that it's one and the same. Like, you can't be PDA without autism. However, there's nuances here where, like, I think our kids, I mean, if I'm just speaking very honestly, like, I think my son would have been put into the category of pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified or Asperger's pre 2013 when those were lumped into the autism category, which is so much more broad now.
Yes.
Um, I also like I have two things that I'm focused on. One is like helping parents, and the other is getting PDA on the map, which I also feel like will help the kids and parents because we can't get insurance or school supports or anything if people can't understand the category. But ultimately, when I'm helping parents, I break it down into like the root causes or mechanisms. Like PDA for me is like a nervous system mechanism. So anytime the brain perceives a loss of autonomy, which is freedom and choice, or equality, there's a nervous system activation which registers as like there's a lion in front of me.
Yes.
And that's just one piece of the puzzle, of the brain puzzle. And that's really what I focus on with my work and supporting families because I think it's a missing piece from a lot of conversations. But I certainly have lots of families who their kids are pandas, they come from foster care or adoption, or are ADHD and don't believe their child is autistic. And I would never be like, well, you're wrong because, I'm like, well,
Yes.
what matters is what helps your child. And if looking at this as a mechanism and supporting it as such, like we don't need to worry about if it's autism or not. Right. And it's funny because I hold both of those of like, I want I want PDA to be in the DSM-5.
Yes.
and I believe it's part of the autism spectrum. My son is autistic, clearly. Um, but day to day, minute to minute with families supporting them, like, I'm kind of like, it doesn't matter. Like, let's just focus on what parts of the brain need support, and could be sensory, it could be executive functioning, it's also autonomy, and it's all good, you know?
Yes. Yes, at the end of the day, the labels are not nearly as important as the practices and the strategies and the skills of the parents, the understanding and the tools that they're using. And one of the things you've talked about earlier was declarative language.
Yeah.
Declarative language, was that the right pronunciation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pronouncing it like an American, so I think
Ah.
so.
What is that? Because you mentioned that you had that book and it was everybody bought a copy and it was hot topic. So what is it
Yeah.
about that type of language that makes such a difference?
Yeah, so like every book I've read, it has to be adapted to the specific PDA context, right? So before I encourage parents to use declarative language, I actually encourage them to not use any language at all verbally and really focus on nonverbal. But um, declarative language, it's a book written by a speech language pathologist, Linda K. Murphy. I think it came out in 2021. She's also written the co-regulation handbook, which I enjoyed as well. And it's for children with social and learning differences, not just PDA, but understanding that direct questions or imperatives can activate the fight, flight, freeze and shut down communication. So, in her book, she teaches how to, instead of using a question like, "Are you hungry?" or "Did you eat your apple?" or "Let's go get your shoes on," which is an imperative, we can say something like, "I noticed there's still an apple on your plate," or "I can get your shoes for you." So, with a PDA child, the nervous system is so immediately activated, and asking a direct question or using an imperative is perceived as a loss of autonomy or equality to you. So basically, I think of it like, if I'm picturing the brain, if I'm using a direct question or an imperative, we're just going down into the limbic system. And then there's no capacity for the child to, access rational thought, emotions, empathy, communication. Um, so when we use declarative language, we just preempt that, right? And then we have a chance at communication. So it's
Yes.
a really good tool as part of a communication strategy. And I'll be honest, like, I use it sometimes with my husband too. I'm like, I wonder, like, what we should make for dinner, like, and instead of being like, "Can you think of something to make for dinner?" And I find it's just, like, a much more gentle way to bring up
Yes.
topics.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And, yes, I hear you when you say that it can be so triggering for the nervous system, and that explains so much. Understanding that must have been such a light bulb moment for you.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. Understanding also that, one other thing, and this is why I like to think about parts of the brain, I realized how much he wasn't hearing me because I would say something in a declarative sentence. So I had taken out the like potential activation, but then he wouldn't say anything. And so I would use another declarative sentence and say, like, Cooper, I notice, or no, what would I say? I would say, Cooper, I don't know if you heard me. And because it was a declarative sentence, like sometimes he would say, "What?" And I realized in those moments, like, oh my gosh, he's not. And this is part of the social communication difference of autism. Like, he's very verbal and can articulate a lot, but he has processing differences.
Yes.
And the complexity of sound and the complexity of speech, like he was just missing so much of verbal communication, but I was viewing it as like he won't listen to me. Right? So it's like all these tools sort of help you peel back what's actually happening.
What did you find was helpful for you and your family in terms of co-regulation?
Yeah, so there I looked a lot to the trauma literature and polyvagal theory because while I think a lot of the work out there on co-regulation is awesome, it's often thought about in terms of like joint attention and scaffolding. So like, I have this role, you have this role, or we're going to share this task together. But with PDA kids, especially when you're rebuilding or building the relationship and trust through a new lens, you really have to focus on signaling safety without words. So, in the trauma literature and polyvagal theory, it's really about like, how does our mammalian self signal to your mammalian self, like, I'm not going to hurt you? And so paying attention to body movements and tone and getting lower on the ground to the child, which preempts that perception that I'm above the child, which activates the threat response and is intimidating, right?
Yes.
But actually getting below them. So, learning to manage my own facial expressions, movements, and be intentionally communicating without words, which was a very big shift for me because I'm a verbal individual. Like I like
Yes, as am I. I get
talking.
it. Oh, that's hard. Yes.
Yeah, so just stopping the talking is a big one, like just observing, being cognizant of my body, um, being more playful without words. We did a lot of play as animals when he was coming out of burnout. I mean, at least an hour each day of therapeutic play in the home and also OT.
As I hear you explain your role and how much work you've done with him to support him and to not be triggering, it's so much conscious thinking, isn't it? And
Ooh,
just
yeah.
just thinking ahead and planning and not saying anything without getting it right before it comes out of your mouth. And that must have been and must still be really tiring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I always tell parents, and I hope, it can freak parents out, but I need to always name like you're caregiving, you're not just parenting, right?
Yes.
Um, and it's not the same as just being able to be like, hey, go get your shoes on, we're gonna head out, right? Like there's 10 choice points before you even get to the point of transitioning out of the house. Like first, it's like, is it even worth it to try this,
Yes.
Um, but I think it did become a lot easier over time with
Yeah.
practice. Um, it's become much more second nature to me to speak like that and to pay attention to my body and my energy and all that. Um, and I'll just be honest, I have a lot more support than I did. Like, I was really in a dark place during the pandemic when my son wasn't in school for like a year and a half. He couldn't access online learning. Both kids were home, and I was just super depressed. I call it my trauma cave. I was just like, I can't do this anymore. It's too much. And we couldn't find caregiving support. In the US, it's kind of dismal in terms of what's offered, and it's always behaviorally oriented, which is the opposite of
Mm,
what PDA kids need. Um, but even being willing to pay for it, like nobody was up to the task
mm.
because it's hard with a kid who's explosive, right?
Yes.
Um, and doesn't listen to grown-ups. I mean, now he does
Yes.
for some. Um, so my husband and I thought really outside of the box and invited two women peace builders from my doctoral field research in Colombia. Um, to come live with us. And one of them, and neither of them spoke English, but again, as I said, like it was all about nonverbal communication, right? And they had both lived through civil war, and their nonprofit was working with families who had been traumatized by violence. So I was like, who is going to not judge us? And like, who could we invite to come live with us? And I spent a lot of time internationally working before in my past life, um, in Latin America, and they both somehow made it. They came in the midst of the pandemic, and one of them, she would bounce my son on the trampoline for like 2 hours at a time. She would swing him, like, he would wrap himself up in blankets, and she would just swing him back and forth because he couldn't move his own body because he needed the sensory input, but he was in burnout, right?
Yes.
And then the other one, Jake, I'll name her, was an art therapist and worked directly with families in Colombia. And she just like worked with me on healing.
Mm.
And when like we set up a little communal environment where it was like three moms, right? Like we were all moms to each other. They're in their late 40s, but I would make lunches and they would make dinners, and we would clean the house together, and they just like Jackie was really focused on rhythms. She was like, it's chaos in your home without judgment. She was like not judgmental,
Yes.
but she's like, healthy homes have rhythms, and like, let me help you establish these. And because my son couldn't eat at the table, but like he was so activated and needing so much support, we couldn't sit down to eat. We were eating all like frozen meals. And so they really got me back on my feet. And I can't even express like how much gratitude I have for them. Um, and then we decided to invest in an au pair also from Colombia, and she's finishing up 2 years in May.
Yes.
And then we're bringing on a bro pair from Colombia. So
Ah.
yeah, because we
Oh,
need one adult with each child for safety.
yes. Yes. How old is your son now, your eldest?
8,
He's 8. And your youngest?
4.
Is 4. Yes. Yes. So they're still quite
Yeah.
young. And you seem well. It meeting you and talking with you, it tells me that the work that you all did together, having those incredible women in your home, has made a really powerful difference for you and for the whole family.
Yeah. Yeah. It was life changing.
Yes. How can our listeners connect with you and work with you? Where can you send them to find out more?
Sure. So I like to think of it as in tiers, right? So,
Not as in
absolutely free.
crying tears, as in
No, no,
TIERS.
like levels, like, you just want to dip your toe, come hang out on Instagram. So we have
Yes.
Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube. But primarily, like, where I hang out is Instagram because that's the community space that I feel most comfortable in. Um, and then I have a series of $25 master classes, which I like to think of as like each one is hopefully helping you solve a problem. Um, Not all the problems, but there's one
Yes.
for making decisions about school or understanding burnout. And then I have a signature program called the Paradigm Shift Program, which is starting on April 5th, but I run it 3 times a year. And that is 3 months of learning, being in community, group coaching, and basically all my work bundled into one, and then lifetime access to an alumni portal. And then I do coaching, but it's quite limited, like probably only less than a dozen families a year at this point, just because we go so deep. But
Yes.
yeah. Oh, and I have the At Peace Parents podcast.
Ah, yes. Yes,
Yeah.
sensational. Thank you. And so what I'll do is I'll put, as listeners to my show will know, everything will be in the show notes. And if you're a new listener today, then welcome, and you can pop to the show notes to get links to all of the different places that you can find the wonderful Casey Ehrlich. And Casey, thank you again. Thank you for the work that you are doing for the world. I say that with so much gratitude because the difference that you are making for families in crisis, for families who feel like they've just exhausted every medical practitioner that they could possibly connect with still no answers. You are really helping people to see their children, as you said earlier, through a different lens, and the future of each child who's recognised as living with PDA and the future for the family it's a different trajectory with this kind of understanding and support. So a huge thank you to you once again, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr Jodi Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.